Welcome back to Apex Sci-Fi. In the southern quadrant of the rim, there is a place called the Midas Cloud. It is a nebula composed of pulverized heavy metals and suspended gold dust, a glittering celestial wonder that looks like the treasury of a god. But to a pilot it is a graveyard. The metallic dust is highly conductive, creating a constant field of static interference that fries sensors, jams communications and clogs engine intakes. It is a place where you fly by the seat of your pants or you don't fly at all. This golden veil is the perfect shield for Baron Malvern. Malvern is a man who turned cruelty into a luxury brand. He is the galaxy's most notorious slaver, specializing in gilded labor, the kidnapping of high-tier engineers, artists and scholars who are forced to work in his orbital mines, their bodies often plated in ornamental gold as a sign of his ownership. He operates from a massive, opulent cruiser called the Gilded Cage, a ship so heavily armored and camouflaged that even the Hegemony's patrols have given up looking for it. Silas Vane was hired by a mysterious benefactor to recover a high-value asset from Malvern's collection. The client didn't care about the other thousands of slaves. They only wanted a specific nobleman returned to safety. The pay was enough to buy a small moon. But Silas Vane doesn't just look at the price tag. He looks at the chains. Vane approached the Midas Cloud not with his thrusters burning, but in silent flight mode. He killed the Vesper's main reactor 5 light minutes out, allowing the ship to drift on its own momentum into the golden haze. Inside the cockpit, Vane sat in total darkness, his obsidian mask the only light in the shadows. He was breathing slow, shallow breaths to conserve oxygen as the ship became a cold piece of iron, invisible to Malvern's thermal scanners. He drifted for hours, the gold dust scratching against the hull like 1,000 tiny needles. Finally, his passive sensors pinged. The Gilded Cage was ahead, a massive, gaudy monstrosity of gold leaf and weapon platforms, anchored to a magnetic asteroid. Vane didn't use a boarding pod. He stepped out of the airlock into the vacuum, secured by a long carbon fiber tether. He moved through the golden dust like a shark in dark water, his charcoal suit absorbing the glitter of the nebula. He landed on the slaver ship's hull and bypassed a secondary vent, slipping inside the beast. The interior of the Gilded Cage was a grotesque display of wealth. The floors were polished marble and the walls were lined with silk, but the air smelled of sweat and fear. Vane moved through the corridors, a dark, hooded shadow that the golden security droids failed to detect. He wasn't using a gun. He was using a localized short-circuit pulse, a device that disabled the droid's optics without alerting the central network. He found his target in a luxury cell, a terrified young man whose hands had already been partially plated in decorative gold. But as Vane looked through the transparent steel of the cell blocks, he saw the truth. There weren't just dozens of assets here. There were hundreds. Men, women, and children, all wearing the gold-flecked collars of Baron Malvern. "You're Vane, aren't you?" the nobleman whispered as Silas bypassed the lock. "My father said you were coming. Please, we have to go before the Baron returns from the mining deck." Vane looked at the nobleman, then at the rows of cells stretching into the distance. His mask's blue visor flickered. His contract was for one man. His reputation was built on finishing the job. But Silas Vane's ethics were not for sale. Change of plans? Vane's voice was a low, distorted growl. He didn't head for the escape hatch. He headed for the bridge. Vane moved through the ship like a storm. He stopped hiding. He drew his pulse rifle and carved a path through Malvern's private guard. The golden soldiers were fast, but Vane was a human who had spent a lifetime hunting in the dark. He used the ship's own opulence against them, shattering crystal pillars to create cover and using his cloak to vanish into the shadows of the silk hangings. He breached the bridge just as Baron Malvern was preparing to jump to hyperspace. The Baron was a large, soft man, draped in heavy golden robes, surrounded by his most elite enforcers. "Vane?" Malvern sneered, reaching for a remote detonator. "You are a professional. You are here for the boy. Take him and go. Why risk your life for the trash in the hold?" "The contract was for recovery," Vane said, stepping over the body of a fallen guard. "I decided to recover everything." Vane didn't fire at the Baron. He fired at the Nebula stabilizers, the machines that kept the conductive gold dust from frying the ship's internal systems. The ship shuddered. Sparks began to fly from the consoles. The golden dust outside was no longer a shield. It was an invading force. Static discharges began to rip through the ship's circuitry, turning the Gilded Cage into a giant lightning rod. "You're killing us all," Malvern screamed. "No," Vane said. "I'm just opening the doors." With a final hack into the central computer, Vane bypassed the master slave locks. Every cell door on the ship opened at once. He broadcast a message on the internal speakers, to the escape pods. Now. The slaves didn't hesitate. A tide of humanity and alien life flooded the corridors. In the chaos, Vane grabbed the Baron not to kill him, but to use his biometric thumbprint to authorize the launch of the massive heavy-lift lifeboats. The Midas cloud began to collapse, a gravitational anomaly triggered by the ship's failing stabilizers. The Nebula was folding in on itself, threatening to crush everything in its path. Vane dragged the nobleman and a dozen others into his own docking craft, the Baron tied up in the corner like a common thief. The escape was a blur of gold and fire. The gilded cage was consumed by the golden dust, its heavy plating melting under the intense static heat. Vane pushed his engines to the red line, the Vesper's hull screaming as it punched through the collapsing nebula and into the clear black of the outer system. He delivered the slaves to a nearby refugee station. He delivered the nobleman to his father. And he delivered Baron Malvern to a maximum security prison ship, but only after stripping him of every ounce of gold he wore. Vane's client was furious. You breached the contract. You caused a diplomatic incident. You won't see a single credit. Vane didn't respond with words. He sent a single data file to the client, a list of the Baron's hidden bank accounts, which Vane had drained and redirected to the victims of the gilded cage. In his ledger, Vane marked the contract as broken, justice served. In the legends of the Midas cloud, they say that the gold still glitters, but the shadow that once lived there is gone. They say that Silas Vane is a man who would rather lose a fortune than his soul. But Vane doesn't feel like a hero. He just sits in the cockpit of the Vesper, the gold dust still sparkling on his cloak, looking for the next signal in the dark. This has been Apex Sci-Fi. Wealth is a heavy chain, but the hunter is free. If you enjoyed Vane's golden rescue, hit that like button. Comment below. Would you break $1 million contract to do what is right? Subscribe for the next hunt, the night terror of Solace. The Vesper is back in the dark. The hunt continues.